appropriately. Now let me tell you a little bit about tonight's guests. Leah Hager Cohen is the author of 7 novels, including most recently, To and Fro, 5 nonfiction books, 1 pamphlet, and the blog Love as a Found Object, as well as various and sundry essays, articles, and reviews. Cristina Rathbone is an award-winning journalist, Episcopal priest, there we go, and spiritual director. She is the author of On the Outside Looking In, A Year in an Inner City High School, and A World Apart, Women, Prisons, and Life Behind Bars. We are here tonight, of course, to celebrate The Asylum Seekers, a chronicle of life, death, and community at the border. A remarkable, decimating work of reporting about asylum seekers trapped at a port of entry to the U.S., the trauma they carry, the community they create, and the faith they maintain. The Asylum Seekers offers a rare narrative account of the horror of the U.S.-Mexico border. Borders run through Rathbone too, whose mother was a Cuban refugee. So in 2019, she travels to Juarez, unsure what to do, but determined to learn. Weaving intimate portraits of individuals with broader stories about the community, reporting from the border as a whole, and reflections on the meaning of faith in a place of suffering, Rathbone tells us the story of Mexican asylum seekers living in a makeshift tent camp at the foot of a bridge. Life in the camp is both hectic and harrowing. Families arrive, families leave. Families get through to the U.S. Families are returned from the U.S. Women weep, children squabble, and grown men sob over photographs of their murdered sons' mutilated bodies. Here too, however, are beauty, empathy, and hope. Over time, a leadership team emerges. The community begins to convene daily meetings, establish systems of distribution for donations, and start classes for the kids. Serving as an unofficial chaplain, Rathbone is here through it all, listening, receiving, assisting, and most of all learning about what authentic faith looks like under conditions such as these. Written in the tradition of My Fourth Time We Drowned and Rivermouth, The Asylum Seekers renders in startling, intimate detail the day-to-day lives of people who are determined to enter the U.S. legally and who often suffer for it. The result is a fierce, poignant inquiry into the dignity of those who seek asylum and into what we owe each other. Please welcome Cristina Rathbone and Leah Hager Cohen.
We should probably use these. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So hi, I'm Leah. This is Tina. Thank you, Brookline Booksmith. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I feel really, honored, privileged, blessed, grateful. I feel grateful to be here with all of you and with Tina and Tina's offerings. And I also feel grateful. I felt grateful when I heard Myra use the word horror, like that sort of leapt out and caught my ear, and I was like, yeah, like that feels important to name. I'm grateful to you for naming that, and I'm grateful to you for naming that and sharing and showing us horror and, as Myra also said, beauty. So, Tina, will you begin by reading us a passage from the book?
I will. So grateful that Leah's here. Thank you, Leah.
Hi, everybody. So I'm hoping to read 2 very short passages from the book this evening, and for some reason it makes sense to me to read a passage from close to the end of the book first, and then a passage from closer to the beginning of the book second. So this first passage takes place when the community of asylum seekers that I worked with, who had lived on a street, 1 block of a street in downtown Juarez, this first reading is when that community was destroyed, not the people so much as all of their stuff was taken and thrown into garbage trucks, and so the community was dispersed, and 45 of them moved to an Anglican shelter in Juarez, and this takes place in that shelter. I returned to Juarez just in time for Valentine's Day. Dia de Amor y Amistad, they call it in Mexico, Day of Love and Friendship. I went straight to the shelter with plenty of special purple, red, and orange foamy sheets to make cards with, along with glitter and glue, and the class went well until it was interrupted by the entrance of an older woman talking fast. She was just out of detention, we could tell, because of her grey sweatshirt and grey sweatpants, and she spoke so quickly that no one except 10-year-old Brian could follow her. Brian was alone that day. His older brother was off downtown someplace with his new girlfriend. They're friends, he insisted when another kid called them novios. Just friends. Okay, the other kid said. I only called them novios because they kiss each other. Left behind and feeling a little hurt and lonely, Brian seemed grateful for the distraction, and he concentrated hard as the terrified woman spoke all in a jumble. She was looking for her family, he told us, for her daughter, I think, and her niece. The woman nodded energetically at this, but she was so rattled that she wouldn't say their names, and we had no way of knowing who they were. Did she have a photo? No, she said. Sitting next to her on the bench, attentive as an altar boy, Brian asked a few questions, quietly, only to her. Then he leapt up. I think I know who they are. I think they arrived last night, he announced. I'm going to go and see if they're upstairs. The old woman's husband had stepped shakily into the room by then. He was an elderly, dignified man from the countryside with a weather-worn face and bright white, close-cropped hair. Together, they followed Brian slowly up the fire escape stairs to the dorms. Several minutes later, Brian returned and told me that the family had reunited and, matter-of-factly, that the old lady was crying. Then he tucked into a bowl of Valentine's Day Hershey's Kisses. I've been fantastically helpful. I figured it out, he said, repeating words I'd just told him as he paid himself with a pocketful of 2, glance at me, 3, glance at me, 4 Hershey's Kisses. Later, the husband came down to smoke a cigarette outside in the sun. He spoke in details instead of narratives, in fragments. I listened as closely as I could and started to understand that 4 young men in his family had been murdered in the last 72 hours, stabbed and shot, right next to their ranch. Pam, 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 pam. In their car, together. The wetness of the blood, the places that had pooled, the way the driver's head looked, the 2 in back. He, his wife, and 28 other members of their extended family had arrived in Juarez 2 nights before and went straight to the border to ask the United States for protection. The 2 grandparents were let straight in, only now, fewer than 48 hours later, here they were again, their request for asylum formally and permanently denied. It was the same old story. Here's part of the transcript. What will you do if you fail to gain asylum? I will go back to Mexico. Are you afraid to live in another area of Mexico? No. Do you know what asylum means? No. I have heard it can make you more secure, but I do not really know. These answers alone were enough to fail the interview and change the life of his family forever. But what else could he say? If he was denied access to the United States, where else could this elderly and dignified rural worker go except back to Mexico? Besides, he was unable to think clearly even then, and his wife even less so. And tell me, who would be able to speak clearly under circumstances like this? Would you? I mean, if you'd just seen 4 of your sons and nephews in a bloodbath of a car where they'd been stabbed and then shot outside of your home, and then spent the night running with your spouse, who was even more undone than you, and 28 other members of your family who you'd gathered up and kept together, would you be able to clearly and precisely answer the questions a uniformed officer asks you in the foreign language of a foreign country during something you have no idea is even called a credible fear interview? I still know so little, but I know at least that no provision was any longer being made for any of this. There were set questions and set answers, and if an asylum seeker answered the set questions in ways that did not directly fulfill the requirements, they failed and were sent back to what very well may be their death. This is just the way it was and is still, every day, over and over again. The old man was still talking, interrupting himself now to rage about the officials over there. They kept asking us if we were delinquents, he said, leaning forward in his chair, incensed. We! I am a law-abiding man, a hard worker all my life. We have run through the night without even burying our sons, but all they want to know is, have you ever been convicted of a crime? Have you spent time in prison? Even of the women, they asked this. Even of my wife. And I was struck again by how much pride and honor and steadfastness became invisible in the whittled down world of border detention. Young Brian came outside then and sat next to the old man on a step in the shade, which meant I had a decision to make. I could continue to witness to the old man's grief and rage, or focus on Brian and get him away from the too bright glimpses of horror the old man was conjuring. With a knife, they cut him from here to here, he was saying now, slicing a line from the base of his neck to his groin. I decided to go with Brian. I'm so bored, he said, scuffing the edge of his sneaker against the leg of a table when we got back inside. No, Brian, you're not bored, I said gently. But let's make a card for your mom, or your brother, or your uncle in the States, maybe. When he didn't respond to that, I said, you can choose the music, which shifted things. Ozuna, he decreed, and did a little macho dance move in imitation of his favorite Puerto Rican trap star before pulling out a sheet of purple foamy and drawing a wobbly heart.
Thank you, T. I want to invite you, I want to ask you if you would maybe give us all a little bit of context about the community, where the community was living, what was going on with the community before they came to be in this shelter. And also, once you've done that, I think people might like to hear a little bit of context around just how you came to be there in the first place. And in the book itself, you at times you talk about being, quote, a kind of untethered and roving priest. And you talk about this freedom as an untethered and roving priest that had felt essential back in Boston. And so I wonder, when you sort of give us a little context about how you came to be where you were, it maybe also to ask you if you could sort of address the capacity in which you arrived in the border communities and your relationship to going as kind of a priest, but not like super capital P priest.
Yes, so the community that this book is about, it was just 4 months of work. The whole book is about 4 months. They were a community of Mexican asylum seekers who didn't have to live in the shelters that Mexico had set up for asylum seekers because, of course, they're in their own country. So they said, we can do whatever we want. We don't want to live in the shelters. We want to stay right here, right next to the port of entry, so that we can go and try 24 hours a day to ask asylum. And that is what they did. And 24 hours a day, almost always, they were denied their legal right to request asylum. And so over time, I was there when the first few people arrived, and then over about 6 weeks, it grew to be 500 people living on just a block in downtown Juarez. one single block. So it was packed, and people made their own tents, and it was very, very difficult living conditions. Hundreds of children, but they gathered together and they created a community with afternoon meetings, with rules, with ways to distribute items that were delivered to them fairly, with ways to look after each other. They were absolutely extraordinary how they came together to make life possible for themselves. No one from the outside, they themselves. And my role with them was just to do what I could to help them with that task. They obviously knew a lot more about what they needed and how they could solve these problems than I did. But I was also an American citizen, which gave me a lot of power that they didn't have. And I'm also an ordained priest in the Episcopal Church, which gave me a tiny bit extra power to being a citizen. So I just spent every day being with them, mostly listening and receiving and absorbing what they said, and also trying to get stuff to help them, and ultimately accompanying them up to the bridge as they asked for asylum, trying to offer what little sort of power and status I had as an ordained American member of the clergy to try to increase their chances of requesting asylum. So that was the community. And I headed there from here. Some of you know, many of you know, I worked for 12 years with a community of homeless folks in downtown Boston. And we formed this community together, a blessed, wondrous community called Manna, Many Angels Needed Now and Always. And when it was time to leave that community, I went to the border to see what I could do, both as a priest and as a person, and as the daughter of a Cuban woman, and the granddaughter and the niece and cousin of people who'd been allowed into this country and given a chance. And this was in 2019, which was very like today, sadly. And people weren't being given a chance to start new lives in this country. But I am always wary about creating ministries out of the ether and plonking them down as if I know anything about it. So I wanted to go free and untethered to listen and learn from the people most directly affected by what was going on the border, and then to respond. And again, as you pointed out, Leah, this felt essential when I was here. When I was there, however, being free and untethered also meant I was extremely alone. And it was really, really very hard to function as a priest without a community that could hold me, even as I worked to help hold others. So it turned out to be kind of double-edged sword. And then once I settled working with the community in Juarez, the roving stopped and the freedom stopped and the community building started. So it started to get better even as the crisis increased.
Why? Can you say a little more about why it was particularly hard there not to be supported by it being ensconced in an institution?
Yeah, a community. Institution, you know, who cares about them? But community is really important because it was really scary there. And it was really dangerous on the southern side of the border. And that Juarez is the 5th most dangerous city in the world, even just in and of itself. It's the city that invented the term feminicida because so many women are killed there. And these families were living out on the street downtown, the most dangerous neighborhood of that city. So there's plenty of violence and danger in a way that I'd never experienced before, and also plenty of trauma and violence remembered that I was listening to, and then plenty of anticipated violence. For those lucky ones who got into the States, it was not going to be, I knew, what they hoped, just, you know, roads paved with gold. And for the many, many families who did not get through and then had to rethink their lives all over again. So for all those reasons, I felt very much the need for the support of a community.
And following up on that, the experience reading the book is that in time, this is exactly what happened, that you do come to be in community. And there's a line in the book, you speak about, you say, giving unilaterally, day after day, can never lead to healing for anyone. And I feel like that's quintessential you, and that's something you have been teaching me ever since I've known you, and you sort of teach or model by example by the way you live. And just now, as you were talking, you said, I went to the border to see what I could do. You didn't say I went to the border to like help people, but to see what I could do. And I would love for you to talk a bit more about this, the real mutuality that you are able to enter into, and sort of how did you first learn, unless you've always had that, but was there an instance in your life where you first like really realized this is how to be in mutual community with people versus sort of like I am here to help you or them? And then like how, if you want to give an example or just talk a little bit about how you were able to be in community at the border by keeping that in mind.
There's so many people here that I've had this conversation with for so many years in so many ways. It is the ground, I think, of the kind of work, it's very small work, but the kind of work that I do and many in this room do. And the reason we do it is not because we think we have so much to offer, but because we have so many needs. And I find that I need a lot from everybody I have a deep relationship with, and I pray that I offer something too. But just giving to people, we've seen it, many of us who work downtown, and many of you all have seen it as well. If you just stand there providing for someone, everybody shrivels pretty quickly. And everybody's humanity just dries up and becomes desiccated as everything becomes transactional. And as one group of people have the thing, whatever it is, and the other group of people need the thing, whatever it is, and the people disappear. But when you approach someone as a person, hello, who are you? I'm Tina. Everything opens up, and everybody is freed then to give and receive. We all have gifts, so many of them, all of us. Asylum seekers on the border, homeless folks, literally everyone has innumerable gifts and unique gifts that the world needs. And we all also have needs. And for me, when I'm in touch with both of those things is when a transactional relationship transforms into a sacred encounter. And that sacred encounter is what I, sadly, still to this day, chase. So that is also part of the reason why I went to the border, is my own need to understand what's going on and to meet and be met by people who are having such an incredibly hard time as a result of things that are going on in the country that I've chosen to call home.
Having mentioned God, is this a good moment to ask you if you would give us another reading from the book?
One second, sorry. So this reading is on the street before the community is demolished, and I think that's all I really need to say. It starts off mentioning a woman named Tanya. I have many heroes down there, and she's an immigration lawyer who works with Clinic, the Catholic Legal Services, and she was down there for a year, an extraordinary woman. Tanya brought a team of immigration lawyers who were visiting from across the states for an unplanned and additional charla, or chat, on the street. They spoke with the community, clarifying again the fundamental requirements for asylum, visited one of our classes for the kids, and then offered to accompany a couple of families up to the checkpoint. Initially, a crowd huddled in the shade, trying to decide how many people should go up with the team. 2 families? 3? When they finally agreed to go with 3, the call went out, echoing down the street. Familias 1, 2 y 3, familias 1, 2 y 3, until the 3 families at the top of the list emerged. ducking under the flaps of their little houses, packs stuffed tight as stones on their backs, caps pulled low, except Luis, the rakish kid who always wore his baseball cap sideways, and did that day too, though he was visibly terrified underneath it, as they all were. It had been so long since anyone had gotten through, 8 full days of trying and failing, trying and failing, trying and failing, and the hope the presence of the lawyers brought undid us all. A prayer came easily, for God's mercy to fill the hearts of the Border Patrol, for God's courage to fill the 3 families, and for God's grace to course through everyone who would not get through today, bringing them what they needed in ways they could actually feel. Afterward, I crouched down to speak more intimately with Luis and the other 2 kids. I needed to express something to them, to imbue them with some urgent thing, and it turned out to be this: how extraordinary they were, and how lucky my country was that they were hoping to move there. And, most of all, that however hard the next few days may be, they had all they needed already, right there in their hearts. The intensity with which the kids listened to all this was sobering to the point of silencing. Stunned a bit by it, and wanting also to arm them again for the reality that awaited, I lumbered back up to my feet and gently cuffed Luis's jaunty sideways cap the way I always did. But he just kept looking at me and looking at me until he turned to follow his family single file up through the turnstiles and onto the bridge. We were all openly weeping by then, and at least partly because we all needed space to subdue both our hope and our fears, we quickly dispersed. Hoping for a few minutes of solitude, I set off for the black and white coffee shop on Juarez Ave where I'd become a regular. But another little boy, Samuel, far smaller than Luis and without the pizzazz, stopped me as I passed. He'd been trying to speak to me earlier, and I'd told him that he needed to wait, so here he was again now, silent in front of me, with his even littler sister and his only just taller mom. I stopped, crouched down again to be at eye level with him, and waited. For a time, the 3 of them just stood there in a straight line, little boy, tiny girl, slightly taller mom. Then Samuel began to tell me what he'd been trying to tell me all afternoon, that his mother was afraid, that she had heard that the kids would be separated from her in detention and that they would be inside for months and months, and it would be freezing, and they'd have nothing to keep themselves warm and not enough to eat. And if either of the children, he or his sister, he said, looking down at his sister for a moment, started to cry for any reason, or maybe even to squabble, that the guards would come in and beat them and then take them away. Was this true, he asked? This boy who looked maybe 7, and who was speaking already so lucidly and fluently on behalf of his mother, who was too afraid to speak, even to me. This was what his mother had heard, he repeated. This was what people had told her, that they would be separated, even if they made just one mistake. I can't describe the intense effect this tiny boy, speaking like a man on behalf of his terrified mother, had on me. He stood so straight, and he spoke so quietly, and also so clearly, because it was important what he was saying he knew, and he might not get another chance. Is it true that me and my sister will be sent to live with strangers? He asked then. Do you have family over there? I asked. Yes. Then you will probably go and live with them together. But they live in Orlando, Florida, he anguished, as if it was the real name of hell. I tried to let him know that every kid in the world wanted to go to Orlando, Florida, because it was where Disney World was, but I don't think he'd ever heard of Disney. Mickey Mouse lives there, I said stupidly, turning to his little sister, and Donald Duck. Does Little Pony live there too? I love Little Pony, his sister said. Yes, Little Pony too, I said. And still the boy stood there, straight and as tall as he could make himself, asking his questions, voicing the fears of his family. I told him then that I was a priest and was therefore not allowed to lie, not ever, and that I had never heard of children being separated from their mother because they cried or squabbled, or of them being beaten. But it was not enough. It was as if Samuel was waiting for something. And then, all of a sudden, I knew what it was.
I took off the bracelet I'd been wearing every day, the one Judy from Manor had given me that read, "Though she be small, she is fierce." And I wrapped it around his wrist, pressing the metal ends together so that they touched around his tiny arm, telling him as I did so what it said. I added that the adults might take it away from him in detention, but that they would have to give it back when he left to go to Orlando, Florida, and that it didn't matter anyway whether he had it or not, because it was true what it said. He was fierce, and he already had everything he needed in his heart. I pointed to his heart then, and then to his sister's heart, and to his mother's heart, and told them that God lived in there. God. And that no one could ever take God away. Ever. The intensity between us must have been palpable, because a silent and creeping group of wide-eyed little kids had started to gather around us. So I pointed to each of their hearts too, one by one, and very quietly told each one of them the same. God is in here. God is in here. God is in here. God is in here. And then I had to leave, because I really was going to utterly, utterly lose it. Small, real things. Small, real things. This is what I kept trying to remember and to trust. Not big, impressive things, but small, real things are the way to love, with, through, and for the other. Small not because we can't be bothered, but because we are small ourselves. And because every time we honor this smallness without shutting down, every time we acknowledge our lack of sufficiency, remain willing, even so, to both meet and be met by the other, well, whatever follows then will both come from and lead to the realm of abundance some of us call God. And real transformation will happen only on an infinitesimal scale. This is how small, real things make a small, real difference. And this is important too, because small, real things are necessarily incarnate. They cannot be faked or sold or even advertised. They can only be sought in the moment and then welcomed. They require nothing flashy, nothing expensive, only a mute and muscularly passive stance, full of willingness and reliability and vulnerability. It isn't that small, real things don't sometimes become large, real things, because they do. It isn't the smallness that's the point, but the intention. It's as if the act of desiring and then seeking something small liberates us to receive without measure. As if by not aiming for bigness or for success, we somehow become freed from the regular marketplace world in which something is always given in exchange for something else, and enter instead a realm where giving and receiving become the same thing. Here are a couple of sentences by Sandra Cisneros, which cheered me up one dark night in El Paso, because they say more or less the same thing, only way more simply. I don't know anything, she writes, but I know this. Whatever is done with love, in the name of others, without self-gain, whatever is done with the heart on behalf of someone or something, whatever work we make with complete humility will always come out beautifully, and something more valuable than fame or money will come. This I know.
Thank you, Tina. There's a passage in the book where you put on your collar, you put on your visible symbol of being affiliated with an institution that has some power, because it might help you have a different kind of interaction with a border officer than were you not wearing this visible symbol of power. On the heels of that particular reading, it seems so vulgar, right, to think about drawing upon the power of large fake things. And yet, part of the reality that you were living in was that maybe there were moments when this could be useful. And in this particular scene, it's an amazing scene with multiple layers and pivots within it. But it's sort of power facing off against power until this moment when you say you had to remember to shrink rather than to puff up. So again, it's this idea of like, when will it behoove me or behoove God or behoove humanity or love to be small, and when is it useful to, put on the trappings of institutional power? Anyway, I just think because this is something you have grappled with for so long with such beautiful pissed offness. I've seen you pissed off so many times about this. I just wanted to invite you to sort of, if you would, reflect on this as you encountered it, particularly with this work.
Thanks, Lee. So power is really important, especially if you get to give it away. And the power of a lowly priest is very minute, but it's what I got. So it was important for me every time I went up to accompany the Asylum Seekers to put my collar on. I never wore it on the street, but it was really important to be visibly a priest, because maybe there's a chance that a Border Patrol officer will respond differently to me as a priest and an American citizen than just as any old American citizen. And certainly when we brought people with more power, bishops and things like that, I told them to dress all the way up, wear all the gear, because it has an effect and it works. But what we were doing then was not asserting our own power for our own sake, but rather asserting our own power for the sake of others, sort of draping that power over the people we're with. And some of you identify as religious here, and I know many of you don't, but I'm just going to talk about it for 1 minute. I hope that's okay. So Jesus, my teacher and best friend, was all about always giving away his power. The Christian story is that he's God, right? So there's a lot of power. And giving it all away to the least and the last and the lost and the outcast and the broken and the people in despair. Always, always, always. He never stood on his own power. He just poured it onto them, poured it onto them, poured it onto them. And so sometimes it felt important to assert that power in order to have the people I was with be identified with the power. And it often got complicated and often led to conflict, because now you've got two people with uniforms, and I write about that quite a bit. The Border Patrol uniforms and my priest uniforms, and we're kind of facing off. Again, encounter has been reduced now to uniform versus uniform. And so that never really went anywhere very good, but still it felt important to do.
Thank you. I want to ask Tina one more question, and then we'll open it up for questions you guys might have. I wanted to sort of bring it around to now. I know a lot of people are trying to figure out how much horror to connect with on a daily basis or a doom scrolly hourly basis, and how much it might be healthy and preserve energy to be useful in a long struggle of resistance to limit intake of horror. And what can you help us? What are your thoughts on this?
I think incarnate, if you're encountering it in an incarnate way through real people in front of you, that's very different to just watching it on the news and just receiving it that way. Because I think, again, that relationship becomes a sacred encounter, and that becomes very powerful, powerless, whatever, vulnerable and open and transformative in and of itself. So I think being on the border, I was just there last weekend, being on the border with people who are suffering, that was all day, 2 eyes open that was my work, to try to keep them open, to try not to close them, to try not to turn away, to try to receive and absorb and hear what they were going through. But my method is just my method. We're all coming up with our methods, right, and then changing them. So I have an hour of news a day of different kinds, and I think of that as being like the macro up over my head, and then for the rest of the day I duck under the macro and just operate on the micro level, again trying to do small real things that then can act as medicine for the anxiety and the heartbreak that's everywhere. I'm super grateful to have a new job where I'm able to do that.
It's your guys' turn. Should we pass that?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you
Yes.
so much. Okay.
Thank you so much for the work for the work that you've done, and for the, I'll just stand, sorry.
Oh.
So I was saying, thank you so much for the work you've done, going to the border and really getting to see firsthand that experience. I work for an internet company children's program, and so I see kind of that experience firsthand with the children that we work with. And so you spoke about the trauma that they're bringing in, but I had several questions before, but program's shutting down, so it's okay. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. So weird to cry in public that. So you spoke about what do you do with the hope? So I guess my question is, first them to see what's happening and seeing that the data that we're using is being used against them now. How can someone in these positions still feel that hope that you read about? Thank you.
Again, for me, all I can answer, first of all, thank you for your work, and I'm so, so sorry, and may that work be resurrected. And the only medicine I've been able to find is to continue to find other ways to do the work and be connected to the people that you've been given to serve, and to love and to be loved by. And if you can just find a way that maybe is not that way, that real way, but for now, and mostly for you, in that way of mutuality, just to keep in connection and to give and receive to the people who most need it. And then for me, also prayer. Those are the only two things that I found that are in any way helpful, because everything else is just too shot through with grief and anxiety. Thank you for being here. I'll also add real quick that I was just on the border, and the diocese with whom I did this work, they just got a letter saying they were going to be shut down because of human trafficking. Because they're human traffickers, because they've been housing asylum seekers. And the only way that the letter said the only way they won't be shut down is if they provide the A numbers, names, and addresses of every single person they worked with, which, thanks be to God, and so far they have absolutely refused to do. So it's out of control.
Tina, thank you very much. You've done a remarkable job here at showing us how the awe that you feel when you realize not the magnitude of what these people are carrying, but how they're carrying it. My question for you is, did this translate across the border? Did you ever meet the centurion who stood there struck by awe, saying, surely this was the Son of God?
What a beautiful question. He's referring to when Jesus is on the cross, and a Roman, one of the oppressing armies, says, surely this is the Son of God. Yes, I did. there was a beautiful Border Patrol agent who, and the story is in the book, who himself had come across the border as a child, and he leant over. I wasn't there for this first part, but he leant over and said to this kid, "I was you," and then burst into tears, and then started bringing lunches and stuff and giving them to the people up on the bridge. We would spend hours on the bridge every day, hours and hours and hours. And then I wasn't there for that, but then I would cross back into the States every day. I slept in the US, in El Paso, and at night. So I went back, and that guy, that Border Patrol agent, you know, they all circulate their jobs, and that day he was doing passport stuff, and he saw me, and he leapt out of his seat, and he made me come to the front of the line, and he said, "Did they get through?" And I said, "No, not yet." And he was so devastated. So there are a bunch of him. It's true. It's very easy to blame the Border Patrol. I did it every day, but it's not correct. Because many of the members of Border Patrol are really suffering moral injury themselves. Not all, for sure, but many. So yes.
Hi, Tina. I just was wondering if you were in touch with any people who might have made it through, and if they formed a community after they got in, just for kind of stories of hope of people who might have made it.
So I'm not in contemporary contact with anybody. This was 5 years ago, but many families did get through, and they went to, you know, wherever they had family across the states. I mean, to places that I found really surprising. One family went to a Navajo reservation. I mean, they went everywhere. And for a long time, I was in contact with them. But then people lose their phones, whatever, and contact is broken. And I don't know. You know, a year ago, I would have said, yeah, and they're doing great. And I just don't know now how they are.
I've been a member of All Saints Church for about 20 years, and I think I just missed you. And listening to you helps me better understand the deep, deep regard and love that members of that community have for you. So I thank you for helping me to see you and what you have meant to so many people. My question, and if this is intrusive, shut me up. How are you dealing with your trauma?
Well, so All Saints is the church. I went there by mistake one day just for a funeral, and kaboom, the whole thing happened. And so this community of people brought me from a complete non-believer, my son Jack's here, he remembers this, to being a priest 10 years later, almost exactly to the day. So they're an incredible community. I owe them so much. So the secondary trauma of being with so many traumatized people, I didn't know that I wasn't very well, though many of my friends knew that I wasn't very well when I got back. One dear friend took me to the most beautiful tree in the Arboretum and said, "Look." And that was a moment when I was like, oh, the trouble is all I see is tree. I can't see any beauty at all. In fact, this book, I didn't go to the border to write a book at all. I had no idea of writing a book, none. I loathe writing. But I didn't have words to talk about in any way any of these experiences. I literally didn't have words. I couldn't tell people any of these stories. And so I started writing in order to find the words. And then slowly over time, it began to cohere into stories. So I wrote to find the words.
You talked about doing small, important things, and all of us have ways we can do that. where we are. I'm wondering about if you have any suggestions about small, important things we can do to help at the border with the people that you worked with. Is there any way we can connect with them or support them from here?
Thanks for that question, Jeb. So there are many local organizations where I hope you're all plugging in and supporting however you can. We all have different gifts, and we all have many gifts, so pick 2 or 3 of your gifts and support them that way. For your own sakes, as much as for the people you'll be working with. And it is true that I'm just back from the border, and I got to spend time there with some utterly extraordinary people, including my total hero, whose name is also Cristina. And when I was down there, I called her Big Cristina, and I was Little Cristina. And I just followed her around a bit like a little pet. And I saw her just the other day, and I did exactly the same thing. And she is a Catholic laywoman who everybody does what she tells them. Bishops, mayors, everybody. She's one of those incredible, incredible people. And she's working right now with folks who are returning. This huge oceanic tide is beginning to change and turn direction. And there's now beginning to be a tide of people leaving the States because they're so afraid of having their children taken away. Terrified. After all this, to now have our kids taken away, and so they're leaving. The trouble is, they were all in immigration detention on their way in. Everybody goes through it, and they don't have passports, they don't have IDs because CBP have all of those things. So they have nothing. So they're now arriving back in Juarez, and they can't travel back, those who want to their own countries, because they have no ID, nothing. So there's now hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these people in Juarez, and Cristina Coronado is welcoming them, housing them, getting them jobs, getting their kids school uniforms. So when she said getting them school uniforms, we need so many school uniforms, I thought, aha, I can help with school uniforms. Because who here can't afford to buy one school uniform? So I printed out the ways that you can do this. And please do come and pick them up. You can do it online, or you can write a check. If you have a checkbook here, I can take the check and send them all together. But this woman is amazing, and literally every penny you send will go towards these very small, very concrete things to make these people's lives. 70%, she said, of these folks who are leaving the States are choosing to stay in Juarez. 70%. So she's helping them apply for asylum. So all of that work now is going the other direction. And there's also coyotes. Apparently, the people who ferry people charge huge amounts of money, now operating on the northern side of the border, charging people thousands of dollars to get them back again. So that's where we are today. So please help yourself to one of these.
And you have to have a school uniform to go to school.
Sorry, thank you. And you cannot go to school without a school uniform. Yeah.
Hi, I have one more. I wanted to understand, in the passage that you read, the young person was asking about his mom's fear of family separation. And